First of all, thank you guys for having us come by. I think next time we're actually going to host the meeting, so the pizza and drinks are going to be on us next time. So look forward to that. So my name's John James. My friends call me Tony, and I'm here to talk a little bit about design. Are there any designers in the room? Actually, no. Good. So we're going to talk a little bit about design, what it means, and how to implement some very basic UI layouts for any apps that you guys may be working on. That's what we're going to talk about today. This is a very short talk. It's about between 20 and 30 minutes. So at the end, if you guys want to get with us offline, ask any questions about maybe some of the cool stuff we've worked on, or maybe more about UI layouts and design, feel free. Okay. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what actually brought me here today. I work for Waste Management Security Services. It's actually a subsidiary of Waste Management, and what we do some pretty cool stuff. But the main things we do are we provide commercial security services, monitoring, installations. We do vulnerability assessments for small, medium, and enterprise businesses. But another thing we offer, which is of importance today, is software solutions. And we have a project called Intelligent Operations. We lovingly refer to it as IO. And it was born from our need to provide an asset management solution to our physical security business. But over the years, it's actually grown, and we've wound up putting our fingers in a lot of different things, from creating resources for HR to our legal and contract management. We have a whole suite of apps that we offer now, all using Django. So, as I said before, this talk is rated E for everyone, so you don't have to be a Django developer to get something out of this talk today. But I hope that everybody gets something out of this talk today. We're going to talk a lot about design, specifically graphic design, UI layouts. We're actually going to dive deep into those subjects and talk a little bit about color and shape theory. And then we'll move on to talk about the front-end framework that we use, which is Materialize. Do you guys have any familiarity with Materialize at all? Great, this is good stuff. So one in the back.
Material, but not materialize.
Fair enough. So I want to start out by talking about the brain. I'm not a neuroscientist, but one of the things that I find quite interesting about our team is that we're all full stack developers. And I think a lot of the people in this room are also full stack developers. So there's this idea that we all live in either this right brain or left brain mentality, right? So if you're really, really good with math and numbers and programming, you're probably a left brain guy. And if you're really good with art and design, you're probably a right brain guy. But I don't necessarily appreciate that, right? Because that's a debunked myth. We know that you often get context from both sides of your brain. When you're doing something mathematically, you rely on memories and different things like that. But I think that leads to a bunch of problems, this idea that we are either A or B. And that leads to stuff like this, where you have two people working on the same team, but they express themselves in completely different ways. They likely work in two very different environments, very different sets of tools, and they very rarely speak to one another. You have this like programmer versus designer kind of mentality in a lot of shops, and I appreciate where we work because we don't actually have that, right? We're all designers, we're all engineers, we all work on these projects together, and I think that that's actually the way to go. So today's talk is actually going to be just a very short crash course on design. So for all the engineers here, I think this is going to be really good stuff because you guys haven't heard of Materialize and you guys aren't designers, so I think this is going to be good. And the talk is going to be divided up into two parts. Firstly, we're going to talk about color theory, shape theory, and then we'll move on to actually doing an actual layout and showing why we put certain components in different parts of the web page. And we'll end with an example web page that is out in the wild that uses the actual framework that we use. And so in talking about color theory, we're going to start with the very fundamental building blocks of color theory. And I wanted to start here because one thing that you guys may not know is that you've all been exposed to color theory and shape theory from a very, very young age. So this actual children's block set was made by a design house from way back in 1919 called the Bauhaus. And it was part of their fundamentals course on shapes and color theory. And they released it out to the public, and it's been largely popular, and kids still play with it to this day. So the whole point that I'm making here is that we are all designers at our very core. We've all been exposed to this stuff, and it can lead to some pretty powerful solutions with some very simple tools. So here are the very fundamental shapes and the very fundamental colors. So you have the triangle, the square, and the circle. These are the fundamental shapes. And they each have their own character. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But one thing to pay attention to and look at and think about is the fact that maybe a circle is more human than a square. A square has these very solid edges, very, very hard to tip over, doesn't really appeal to the individual as a thing that you want to go in and touch, right? And then you also have the three fundamental colors. You've got red, yellow, and blue. And each of those has their own character, right? So red will probably connote some type of danger or maybe love. Yellow maybe warning or warmth. And blue maybe some type of calm or maybe sadness, right? You have these very, very extreme ends of the emotional spectrum that each of these things can represent, and it's up to you as the implementer of these things to provide context and make sure that your website says what you want it to say. And it's easy to do when you think of color theory and design and these very two simple components, which is character and content, or context, I'm sorry. The character of the actual piece of the UI that you're using should reflect the information you're trying to convey, right? So if you're trying to put forth a bunch of text, you're probably best suited to put that in a card or a square-shaped little object, right? As opposed to you maybe want a user to submit an action, you're going to have them push a round button, right? These are things we don't really think about. We maybe sometimes do them instinctively, but it's really, really important to actually ascribe a value to each component on your web page. I think we often get lost by just recycling things from Bootstrap. If you guys use Bootstrap at all, right? So it's so easy just to fall in and say, oh, I'm going to throw in a table here, and I'm going to throw some buttons here, and not really lend a lot of credence to why you're using a certain action button versus another, or why you didn't use color here versus there. All these things matter, and it's really important to keep those things in mind whenever you're building out your UIs. And one of the things I want to illuminate is the fact that we actually haven't come that far from the very basics of color and shape theory. And I put up the very fundamental shapes right under the design documentation from Materialize. So these are the actual representations of these shapes on the Material Design website. And they go through and they explain like, hey, when you're showing information, it should live in this little thing, this rectangle here, and we call it a card. And cards are really good for displaying very small, very succinct amounts of information. They have their own character. Same thing with the circle, right? It's an action. And the triangle, it also signifies motion. These are all things that the material design framework lay out very clearly, and it's probably one of the best documented anything on the internet. It's really, really cool. And so as a team, we've decided to adopt material design into our projects. When I first started, we were a Bootstrap shop. Bootstrap is really, really easy to use, and it's pretty ubiquitous. It's been around for years. But one thing we did, we actually went through the material design docs and read them cover to cover. And they give you so much value in terms of explaining to the user where you're supposed to put different pieces of your UI. So they say, hey, whenever you whenever your user signs into a web page, there should only be one action button on that web page. That's it. Which is, it can get kind of hard when you're thinking of, okay, I have a CRUD-based application and I want them to do multiple things on this one page. The material design framework actually does a really good job of, streamlining those decisions for you. And the implementation of the material design language by Google is reflected in their Materialize web framework. So this is what you would actually put into your project. This is where you would, this is where instead of Bootstrap, you would use this. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Materialize has, I think, all of the same components that Bootstrap has. You aren't missing anything, you aren't losing anything. You get the same grid system. You get all the same buttons and drop downs. Anything that you would use with Bootstrap, you get with Materialize. But you get other things with Materialize you don't get with Bootstrap. For example, you get certain actions. So your website will actually move and do certain things that you wouldn't be able to do with Bootstrap. And you also get modern UI components. So the components that the circles and the squares and the cards and all that stuff that that I showed earlier are represented a very, very specific way inside the Materialize framework. So that's it. That's all you need to know of color theory, is just to understand this, the concept of character. Like, so this thing, right, has a certain character, and when you give it a certain color, it provides a context to it. Right? So what you're doing is, let's say you put an action button on your page. If that action button is green, it means something, and if it's yellow, it means something else. Right? And so now we're going to talk about UIs and layouts. And really, when you're creating your UIs and layouts, you only need 4 components. You only need to be thinking about 4 things. And you're going to need to think about the structure of the actual web page, the simplicity of the web page, how visible it is, and reusability. And one of the cool things when you use a framework like Bootstrap or Materialize in our case, you get a lot of that stuff for free, right? All the buttons, all the drop downs, all the tables, they're all pretty much there for you. All you have to do is call them, right? But one of the things I really, really like about the Materialize framework and why we kind of adopted it is that it gives you even more of this idea of reusability, giving you extra pieces, extra components that you're going to want to use later on in your application. So we're going to talk about UI layouts, and I'm going to specifically focus on the 3 things you shouldn't do. If you don't do these 3 things and you adhere to any modern web framework, you'll probably be all right. And we're going to start out talking about no side-based navigation schemes. These are one of the worst things you can do for your website, and I'm going to show you why. So here is an actual heat map of user visual patterns over a web page. And if you look at the 2 very far left examples, those are examples with a side navigation scheme. And if you watch the user's focus on the page, they almost either A, never look at it, or B, it disrupts their actual viewing of the content. So you really want to stay away from side-based navigation schemes. Now I understand there are instances where you just have huge apps, right? Like Jira or I can't even think of another, Spotify, something like that, where you kind of have to have a side-based navigation scheme. But for most of the stuff that we're making day-to-day for clients and for small business, you don't really need a side navigation, and it's probably going to do you more harm than good. Because if you try to make your website responsive, what's going to happen? You're going to either squish it all down and you're not going to be able to see all the content, or you're going to have a collapse where you have a hamburger and anytime you click on it, it's going to cover your content anyway. So you'd be better served just not even putting that into your psyche whenever you're building out web pages. Another big mistake that a lot of developers make is actually from a comic called XKCD. Are you guys familiar with that? One real big problem that engineers do especially is they over-engineer their websites. They have 20 buttons all to do a very, very small portion of the actions that they may want to offer to their user. When 9 times out of 10, they'd be best served either A, providing some type of modal input. So basically you have an action, have a modal come up, and the user has to make that choice right then and there. Or just have the user go to a different page and do that. You'd be better served doing that. Why? While you may have to provide an extra step to the user, you don't clutter and cloud your actual your interface, thereby completely ruining the narrative that you're trying to create with your website. The final thing, choice that you can make is don't get color happy, right? Just pick a palette and stick with it. You'd be best served picking a variation of those very, very primary colors. So, red, yellow, and blue. Stick with that. Maybe pick a sweeter version. And you will see that all over the web today. You see companies with their main colors are going to be like pink, maybe like a soft green, and maybe like a soft blue or something like that, or maybe a soft yellow. That's done on purpose. They want to leverage the ability to pass information to their users, and they do that through their color scheme. These are all important things, and we, as engineers, we really don't pay that close attention to them. So, but as engineers, we are concerned with building out our websites. And one of the cool things that you can do whenever you start considering your user behavior is code those behaviors into your templates, and your templates can start inheriting and displaying a more dynamic behavior. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to build out a UI, a very, very simple UI for a detail view, which we're all familiar with, for a basic web application. So I'm using a tool called Balsamic Mockup. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that or used it, but it's really cool, really easy to use, and quite inexpensive. So we're going to start out with a very, very basic web browser. And we're going to go into our detail view and display some content. In this case, we just have a basic table. It's maybe like an HR table for a person, right? Shows all their records, how long they've been at the company, stuff like that. But what if you, as the HR administrator, want to provide an action on top of that? So you want to give this guy from HR an ability to edit this field. One of the easiest ways you can do that is just put an action button in the top right-hand corner. And it's a very specific reason why you use the top right-hand corner. And I'll go back and I'll show you. So if you look at this heat map, it's actually split, right? You look on the left-hand side and you see it's every user starts there, but in every one of these heat maps, the user also jumps to the very, very top right-hand part of the page. So they're actually looking for actions on their page. So placate, like understand that about your user and then build that into your applications. So they're going to want a main area of content, and then they're also going to want to be able to perform actions on it, and they're going to look for it at that top right-hand corner. So that's what I did. I put the action button right where it should be in terms of the user's behavior. And let's say we want to do more stuff with this. Let's say we have multiple attributes on a specific detail view, so we actually want to see more stuff. Let's say each detail also has a set of files that go with it. Maybe it's a blog and there's another subset of posts that go along with it. We're going to need to be able to navigate to different parts of that. And how would you do that? Treat the content like its own browser window, right? So you're going to shove the navigation as a tab bar menu right above the top of that. Why would you do that? Because that's where the user is going to look for it. And it's also can serve as an indicator for where the user is in their content view. So a good thing, you have a sense of redundancy and helping your user understand where they are in the application. And you have an ability to put more information on a single page, which is exactly what you're going to want to do, especially when you're dealing with big applications. And so finally, let's say, okay, fine, I can perform an action on this detail view. I can sift through different attributes for each part of this. And I also want to be able to filter, right? I want to be able to search through all these results and maybe even get some information about where I am in the application. Easy. You put it right across from the primary action area. Why do you do that? Because once the user hits that primary action area, their eyes slam right back to that left-hand margin, and they go down and start viewing their content, right? Why go through all this trouble of understanding, okay, why, putting this action button here, that action button there? Well, because we can actually create templates off of that. So what we can do is say, okay, and if you guys, everybody here is a Django programmer, or at least touched it at some point. So what you can do is you can put in your templates, hey, this main content area is going to be a content block, right? And the primary action area is its own block. And your tab menu is its own block. And your secondary action area is its own block. It's so easy to code this into a template engine like Django 2 that this now becomes trivial. You can deploy as many detail views as you want, and they all have this same behavior. And that behavior is reflected by the user, which is exactly what you want. So that's it. This is the whole talk about how to create a UI. But I wanted to give you guys one more example of this UI out in the wild, completely found by accident, and it uses the actual materialized framework. So you guys get to see how it looks, and that's with the YouTube homepage. So if you ever, go check out the YouTube homepage, and it's laid out exactly like I just described here. So you have tab bar menus right above the main content. In this case, you have a big advertisement. They want you to see that advertisement. And you have the sub-content under that to help draw you in to see more ads. You've got the search bar right at the top, and you have your actions right at the top right. So everything that I just laid out in that very, very simple mock-up exists in the wild. These are all real things that you can latch onto and create some really actionable UIs based off of that. So that's it. Thank you guys for letting us come and talk. I know this was a very high-level overview of UI and design, but I think it's important. We don't really get a chance to do this as engineers, is actually understand and talk with other designers. So that's it. Thank you.